webinar. So today's workshop is called STEM 101, and it's brought to you by ITE's K through 12 STEM Committee. And so what you might not know about the STEM Committee is that we don't necessarily perform all of ITE's K through 12 STEM outreach. Rather, our goal is to educate and to assist ITE members on ways that they can perform outreach in their own communities. So this webinar then is kind of a train the trainer workshop. And so our hope today is that you will leave today's webinar encouraged and with the tools that you need to conduct a successful STEM outreach event locally. Next slide, please. We have several speakers today, all of whom are dedicated members of our STEM committee. And this slide shows our agenda. And I wanted to point out that at about 20 after the hour, we will be moving into 4 separate breakout rooms, and they're based on age level. So start thinking about which breakout room you'd like to be assigned to. And the age levels are pre-K and kindergarten, elementary, middle school, or high school. And this would be probably based on the age group that you would most likely be working with. Next slide. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Karen Asplin, and I'm currently the Vice Chair of ITE's STEM Committee. Also, I represent ITE's New Mountain District. You can see my, my logo, ITE's New Mountain District, on our Board of Direction. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit about why STEM outreach is so important to ITE and why the STEM Committee got started. Next slide, please. So several years ago, I had 2 kids in middle school. And after talking to one of the science teachers, I agreed to put together a group of local civil engineers to put on a workshop for some kids on different types of civil engineering careers. So a friend of mine who is a bridge engineer had a really fun activity building toy bridges out of paper and then testing their strength with pennies. Another friend of mine who's a drainage engineer had an activity where the kids built these mud dams on cookie sheets, and then they tested how water flowed through different configurations. And so I obviously volunteered to do a transportation activity. And when I went online to find fun transportation STEM activities for kids, I found, thousands of STEM activities. I found tons of activities about rockets, and even this cool contraption on this slide here about how to catapult peeps. But for surface transportation, there was just about nothing. And it got me thinking, I really love what I do. How can I demonstrate to kids in a fun way what the transportation branch of civil engineering involves? Next slide, please. And I realized that perhaps this would be an effort that ITE might want to get behind. And the K through 12 STEM Committee was formed and launched its webpage several years ago. And here's a little bit about why ITE has such an interest in STEM outreach. Well, obviously, ITE as an organization, our existence depends on having students continually come out of school with degrees in transportation engineering and planning. Most high school students don't know a transportation professional, nor have they seen one on TV or in the movies. And think about it, kids might become or decide to become a doctor or a veterinarian or an architect or a lawyer one day simply because all these jobs are things that you see prominently in TV shows and books and movies. And a student can kind of envision themselves doing those careers, which brings us to the next bullet. It's ITE members like all of you here, real live transportation professionals who are our best champions. Kids need to learn about the cool stuff you do in your job every day. And it's difficult to make transportation engineering or planning a kid's dream job when they really can't picture what it looks like. And so the STEM committee was formed to assist in this outreach. Next slide, please. So, and pardon this bad pun, but it starts with STEM. Anyone who knows or who has tried to hire a young transportation professional recently knows there's not a huge crop to pick from. So honestly, with as little information that kids get about what we do, it's surprising that we do have as many students out there who are interested in studying transportation. And the future of ITE is obviously having a continued crop of transportation professionals. So now I'm going to hand things over to our STEM committee chair, Jennifer Heyman.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Warner Heyman, and I am a traffic engineer working for Michael Baker in the Harrisburg, Pennsylvania region. So as Karen mentioned, I am the chair of the ITE STEM committee and the lead for a local WTS Central PA Transportation U high school outreach program. I have organized STEM outreach events for elementary, middle, and high school age groups, and I care deeply about inspiring the next generation of transportation professionals. So today I'm going to walk you through some tips on how to go about building outreach partnerships with your local organizations and schools. So we often hear from professionals that they want to do outreach, but they don't know how to get connected with the kids they want to outreach to. Hopefully this presentation will give you some tips on how to go about doing that. So one of the best ways to get connected with K through 12 kids in your local area or region is to build strong partnerships with the K through 12 schools or organizations. So we're going to walk you through that, but before you start thinking about the actual how of building those partnerships, there are some upfront questions that you or your organization needs to consider. So first, think about the type of outreach that you'd like to do. Are you wanting to do a one-time event or make it a more regular thing, like an annual, monthly, or weekly program? Are you wanting to work with a large group of kids, a small group of kids, one-on-one? And one other question that I don't have listed here is, are you wanting to host your own program or event, or are you wanting to participate in someone else's program or event? It's okay if you don't feel strongly one way or another with these questions, but if you do have a strong preference, it's really important to identify that up front, because it will drive some of the later decisions in the process of getting started with building those partnerships. So once you've thought about the type of outreach, next you want to think about the demographics of the kids that you're interested in reaching. Are you hoping to connect with a certain age group, gender, or other demographic? For example, I mentioned I lead an outreach program with WTS. We know that we're interested in connecting with high school girls from disadvantaged schools in our area. That's a very specific group, right? And having greater clarity on our desired outreach audience helps us to make those decisions later on in the building partnership process. Once you've identified what type of outreach you'd like to do and your desired audience, then you can start identifying potential partners who will be able to help you connect with those kids in that way. So the list here outlines some of the high-level categories for potential partners, K through 12 partners, and a few examples for each. There are obviously many, many more than just those that are on this list, but this gives you some examples. The important thing to think about if you're looking through potential partners is whether that partner will help you to connect with your desired audience with the type of outreach you'd like to do. For example, if you know you'd like to outreach with disadvantaged kids in your area, a local Boys and Girls Club may be a better fit than a private magnet school, right? Or if you'd like to do a monthly program, a school or a more general youth organization may be a better partner than a group that has their own separate programming, like a 4-H or Future City, right? So just things to think about as you're looking for potential partners. Once you've identified those partners, now you're ready to start connecting with them. So first you want to identify the correct point of contact. So instead of just looking at the general contact us email on their website, maybe there's a more specific person you can reach out to. Is there a STEM teacher at the school, or is there an after-school program coordinator with the organization? It's important to get more specific because you're more likely to get feedback from that person, right? So once you've done that, you've identified the person, now you go and craft an introductory email with a formal letter of interest attached. Now, I recommend a formal letter because it helps to legitimize you as a volunteer of an organization. You're not just a random person off the street, you're a professional who has an interest in getting youth connected to your field of work that matters. So putting your best foot forward with a formal letter of interest sort of helps to convey that legitimacy, right? So some pieces to include in your introductory email and letter. Introduce who your organization is. Include logos and links to the website so that they can look for them themselves, right? Explain why you're interested in doing outreach. Summarize what you'd like to do in your outreach. Detail how they can connect with you to learn more, and be very clear about the ask. Are you asking if they have their own programs? Are you asking for marketing help with your program? Are you wanting to establish a formal partnership? Be very clear in this introductory email so that they know what you're asking of them. I've got here on the screen some example emails for the program that I have used for a program that we set up here in the local central PA area where we were working to establish a partnership with a local school. You can see the email is addressed to very specific people. This is, in this case, the principal and the school counselor. I introduce myself up front. I describe what the organization is and what we do, made it very clear what we're looking to do with our program, and gave information about how to connect with us. Then in the attachment, I included that formal letter of interest that explains why we care about outreach in the first place as an organization, what our goals are for the outreach, and just general high-level information to get them a little more info so that they can know what we're trying to do here. In addition, if you're planning to create more of a, let's say, formal, regular program, I strongly recommend considering creating some like preliminary outreach, what we call marketing materials, right? So for example, a program primer, like what's shown here on the screen. So the one shown is one that we created for, once again, we used in that school outreach connection building. So we used pictures from other outreach that we had done to show and convey what types of hands-on activities we're really talking about. We made it really graphical. Ultimately, these additional materials are to get them excited about wanting to partner with you. So it can be a really valuable tool. Here's another example of a program flyer and brochure that we created for a virtual program for the same group. Just a couple ideas. This will be included in the slides that get sent out after the webinar. All right, so once you've reached out to connect with a partner organization, now you'll get to the part of the process that will likely take longer than you're expecting. You'll need to follow up a lot to establish a connection and build the relationship with the people in the organization. This is likely going to be frustrating for you. You may be thinking to yourself, I want to freely give my time to the kids in their program. Why isn't anybody getting back to me? Acknowledge this up front. It may be a little frustrating. But it's really important to remember that anyone you're reaching out to with these schools or organizations likely has other responsibilities and things on their plate, and that often schools and nonprofit organizations are stretched thin administratively. So it's really important to be patient during this period and just keep trying. Be prepared to follow up multiple times, right? Email multiple times. If your email isn't getting a response, try calling the organization. If that doesn't work, try showing up and seeing if you can meet with someone. There's a lot of different options there. You may have to reach out to multiple contacts. For example, that email was sent to the principal and a school counselor. We also reached out to a STEM teacher at that school. Try multiple contacts to help get in with the organization. And then you will likely need to drive the next steps once you've established that connection. So you be the one to suggest, let's meet in person, let's schedule a video call, right? It's not on them to keep this relationship going. Put yourself in the driver's seat and keep that contact moving. And then moving forward, over-communicate on the progress, the plans, action items, next steps, what you need from them, what they need from you. Be in the driver's seat with all of this follow-up. Once you've connected with an organization, I strongly recommend that you tailor the outreach to the group that you're working with. For example, if you are working with a school and they have an after-school program bus on certain days, maybe plan the after-school event on those days that has the bus. Or if you're working with a after-school program and they have specific times that they do things, ask them what works best for them. It's more likely that you'll establish a strong relationship and partnership if you're helping to make it easy for them to bring you on board as a partner. All right. And then I've included here a sample timeline of what it took for our formal program that we established for the school. So this was a monthly program. If you are working to create or to connect with an organization to maybe do just a single or a one-time event, or participate in one of their programs, it's likely not going to take this long. But I'll point out that for this program, it took us a full year of reaching out to the school, building those relationships, establishing a program, designing it, right, getting the kids signed up before we even did any outreach. So, just be prepared to invest some time in this process. Overall, the time that you invest in building the outreach partnerships is really critically important to the success and longevity of your outreach events and programs. So I hope that these tips will help you to establish strong partnerships for your outreach, and thank you so much for participating today. I'm now going to hand it off to Stephanie Ivey, who will present on providing high-value content.
Thank you, Jennifer. So as she mentioned, my name is Stephanie Ivey. I am a civil engineering faculty member at the University of Memphis. I'm part of the ITE STEM committee. And I also direct something called the West Tennessee STEM Hub here in Memphis that works with both students and teachers in the K-12 space to provide support and teaching and learning activities for STEM related content. So you can go to the next slide. So this morning, I'm going to talk briefly about some tips and best practices related to high value content, but then we're going to go into breakout groups so that you can dive in a little bit more deeply in an area that is of particular interest to you for outreach. So we'll have breakout groups based on the grade level of students that you would like to work with. So you'll get the opportunity in those sessions to really discuss more in depth and get more involved in the conversations. So in terms of creating high value content, one of the things that I always mention with people that I'm working with, and I should also maybe mention that with the STEM Hub, we have about 40 undergraduate students that actually serve as STEM ambassadors. So we're constantly training them to go out in classrooms and do this type of work. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is thinking about STEM, not just as those content areas, but as a way of teaching and learning. And this is really helpful when you start thinking about the kinds of activities or the outreach that you want to do in general, in that you want to come up with ways that you can really integrate opportunities for students to practice developing those critical thinking skills and problem solving, helping them have those opportunities to communicate with different stakeholders, and then also creating those experiences that allow them to be creative and understand that they're able to work collaboratively, and they often will when they're in the workforce. So the next thing there on the slides is don't reinvent the wheel. And I think this is super important because there is so much content available to help anybody that is interested in doing this work. And you'll see a picture on here of some of the resources that ITE has related to STEM. And you're going to learn a lot more about that later in the workshop. So just keep in mind that it's not something that you have to spend a lot of time developing new content to be able to do. There's so much stuff out there that you can use. It's just knowing where to find it. And then I think one of the other really key aspects to creating an experience that is valuable both to students and to teachers is really making those connections between that STEM content that they're learning in the classroom and then the real world applications. And that's where, coming in with those transportation related examples is so valuable. Next slide. So I mentioned before creating opportunities for engagement. And I think, a lot of times when people are invited to interact with a class, or if they start thinking about, hey, I want to go out and speak to students about what I do, it's easy to think about that just from the perspective of maybe like a presentation, or you're just going to talk to the students. And so it ends up being more like a lecture. And so it's really important to recognize that no matter what the age level of student is, even college students, they don't get engaged that way. So even if you're just going to present something, you're not, and you don't really have the time or the resources maybe to do a hands-on activity in that particular event, you still have ways that you can create an interactive experience for students. So be sure to weave in opportunities for students to ask questions, and you ask them questions to get them involved in that conversation. Because if you can get them involved, even if you're just speaking, it's going to stick with them a lot more, and they're going to get a lot more out of that experience. Thinking about the audience in terms of the content and the activity type and the time that you're going to devote to a particular task is also really important for making sure that the experience works well for you, but also then for the students. And so, and this doesn't mean that you have to have something completely different for every age group. So for example, we have a transportation challenge that we do quite frequently with students here in Memphis. And we use the exact same general activity for students, whether they are in first grade or whether they are seniors in high school. But the difference is that we kind of level out that experience, and we ask more of the students in high school versus the students in first grade. So there are ways to take the same exact content and just either increase or decrease the level of technical depth that you're going into, and then what you're asking the students to provide as sort of the outcomes or deliverables from the activity. And you'll talk about more of that when you get into your breakout rooms. The other thing, of course, is to do the activity yourself, particularly if this is something where you're using something that's a canned activity. You want to make sure you have actually gone through it and tried it, because you definitely don't want there to be, an issue with the instructions that you don't realize until you get in there, and then you're having to, on the fly, try to figure out how to fix it or make it work. And so, of course, practicing that yourself first is a great way to make sure that that's going to work well. It also will help you figure out if there are places where the instructions are sort of confusing and you might need to add some content there. This is also a really good idea, even if it's something that you're developing yourself, because sometimes there will be situations where you want to create something new or something very specific, maybe related to a subject area that a teacher is covering, and they've asked you to build in some connections to the work that you do. And so in that case, once you've created the activity that you're going to do, it's a great idea to have somebody else try it, because, it's very easy when we're making something up, we know what we mean, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to always translate to others. So the more that you can practice that sort of thing on the front end, the better it will go. Next slide, please. So then the next thing that I have on here is asking the teacher or the community organization leader or whoever it is that you're going to be working with to review the content in advance and let you know what additional connections there are or opportunities there are for you to integrate some familiar examples. So even if it is, let's say you've been invited to be part of a math class. So, in general, it's math, but you might want to ask very specifically, okay, so what sections are you guys in? See if you can't tie into what they've already learned so that you're able to provide an even more relevant experience for the students. Because a lot of times we have found that that's the thing that really makes something like math much more accessible. It seems very difficult when they're trying to do it in this abstract way, but once they understand how and why it's used, it makes it a lot easier to grasp. So if you're able to bring those examples in through the work that you're doing, that is really a win-win for everyone. And then another thing here in terms of sharing about career pathways. So you want to make sure that you're thinking about a range of options here, and we talk about it from the standpoint of a STEM for all perspective. And so helping students recognize that there are lots of ways they can be involved in the transportation industry, and that there are many entry points. And so while absolutely we want to showcase transportation engineering roles and how do you get into those, there are other pathways that students can take that are just as fulfilling. So the more that you can connect to opportunities that students might have, let's say in intelligent transportation systems or TISMO, and you can connect to some of the technical roles. And okay, so you can go through, you know, a 2-year associate's degree or a technical college route or certifications to get into this. You know, you can really demonstrate for students how they might find something that's a good fit for them. And it really makes it much more inclusive for students. The other thing too is to think about when you're talking to students, and let's say you're going as a group, as much as possible, try to make sure that you have a really diverse group with you, because again, it helps students to start build those connections in their minds and helps them to start seeing themselves in those roles. So you want to provide as many opportunities for students to connect and see themselves there in the future as you can. And I think most importantly is to have fun. So you want to make sure that whatever you're doing is going to be something that the students enjoy, but if you're enjoying it, they're going to enjoy it too. So you want to make sure that it's a fun experience for everybody. Next slide. So with that, we are going to go into the breakout groups, and this is where you're going to have the opportunity to really dive in more in depth and to ask questions and offer